Morning, welcome to Crisis Jam 22. My name's Craig and I'm a senior consultant with Murphy Solution. I've got a background in adventure education and I'm a former British military officer, combining those two to fall into the field of crisis management, which is how I find myself here today talking to you. Really excited to be here. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about my reflections on adventure and how we can pick up something outside of the conference room or just think a little bit outside the box, and we can actually make quite good transferable learning into our crisis capability or crisis team. So a few years ago now, I was working on rivers. And one particular river in Norway, there was quite a steep drop and a bit of a bend on the river. It was one of my first times out as a trip leader, or the kind of organizer, if you like. So it was my job to oversee the trip and make sure everyone was happy, put people into rafts and direct us around on the river. It was also my job to kind of maintain safety. So on this particular trip, we had 5 rafts, we had 3 experienced and 2 first season guides with us, each with 6 to 8 customers in their rafts. So as I said, it was a dogleg rapid. It was an extremely steep rapid, but not too technical, nothing too dramatic. But once you're in, you're going for it. So the particular rapid itself had very difficult communication setup. So we needed line of sight communication upstream and downstream. And we needed to take a guide or a couple of guides out of their boats just to deliver safety around the river. So we practiced this, and it was just part of the parcel, and it's what we did on a daily basis. The good thing about this rapid was it was about 5-10 minutes from the rafting centre. It was towards the end of the day, and it was a good picnic spot. So you'd always look good if people are taking their photos. But on this particular day, everything was going well until the fourth boat came down, surged a bit, and a couple of customers fell out. So at this time, it's not really a big deal. These things kind of happen, right? Until we look up and we see the fifth boat, sorry, coming down a river, and we realise at that point, there was nothing we could do to stop it because he was in. And he then subsequently collided with the customer. So we had quite a seriously injured customer in the river. To make matters worse, that customer was a mum of 3 children in a separate boat. So now we had a customer in the water, a couple boats floating around, and some screaming, really quite upset children. So it was less than ideal. But what was my job in this? Well, I got on the phone and I called the rafting centre, I called an ambulance, I got those basics right. And then I paddled to the side, kind of stood there and looked around. The situation kind of developed quite quickly, really. I'd got the basics right, hadn't I? But what next? There was just an information overload. There were just people just doing stuff. And that was just flooding into me, and I wasn't really doing anything at the time. And so after about 5 or 10 minutes, I got a hand on my shoulder and I turned, it was my boss. And he managed to make his way down from the rafting centre to see me and figure out what was going on. And he'd done all of that time before I'd even made a decision or done anything. But by telling me to stop, he allowed me to stand back and have a look. That condor moment, if you like, to see that there was no coordination, there was no control, and it was really people just doing stuff, like I said, wasn't it? So that condor moment allowed me to see, allowed me to focus and organise things in my mind and start to get control back of the situation. We completed the rescue, the family were looked after, the trip continued, and there was no media, and I think we all looked good on the photos. So afterwards, we went back and, we had a brew, sat around a campfire, and we just talked because we had a shared culture of reflection. And I think that was really positive to sit back and reflect on it and talk about what went wrong. And it wasn't academically led, it was just us talking around a campfire. And the six more years I worked at that rafting centre, nothing like that happened again on that particular rapid. So these days, organisations lack time and resources, don't we? And in an ideal world, we'd have it. We'd be throwing resources at, future crisis managers of today, future crisis managers of tomorrow. Sorry, be throwing them through an apprenticeship scheme, and they'd be loving life, and everybody, crisis. But because we can't do that, we need to figure out how, within the realities of our organisation, we can exploit every opportunity for learning. How can we increase our resilience and our competence whenever we get the chance? And I'm here to tell you that adventure is one way to do that. Adventure, we can break the monotony of the boardroom. Adventure complements, not disrupts, our already in place training patterns. But not just adventure, we can be focused on adventure, but we can map anything across from what we want to do, really. And that's what I want to get across today. If we're creative enough, through reflection, we can kind of create a divergent tool set in our team, if you like. We can avoid that groupthink and we can start to bring everything together. And that's what we're going to try and achieve today. So why was that a crisis then, really? Well, we're looking at it and we're thinking, all right, that was quite a basic scenario. You're saying, Craigie boy, that wasn't too dramatic. And you're right, it wasn't. But for me, it stands out. It stands out as very formative. And when I reflect on my time in the military and other time in adventure, that time for me was quite eye-opening, if you like, as to how I performed as a leader, because I wasn't leading, I wasn't doing my job. Now, since then, I've had more dramatic, reflective journeys, and I'm sure people in the audience certainly have. But it's that formative phase, and it's what I can map across that make it important. So, what is a crisis then? Well, one of my favourite quotes for crisis from a guy called Charles Herman. He said in 1963 that a crisis threatens high priority values of the organisation, presents a restricted amount of time in which a response can be made, and is unexpected or unanticipated. So let's break that down a bit. High priority values. We were a rafting centre, so we had one main income, and that was rafting. And that relied on us being safe and having a good reputation. So if we can lose that intangible asset of reputation, that's going to directly hit our finances. So it is a high priority value for us and our reputation, not only us, but as an industry. But then you've got the legal side of life as well, haven't you? So if we get sued or something legal pops up, we also got a financial hit. So yeah, high priority values. If that was one incident that really escalated, it could have. We had a restricted amount of time. Well, yeah, it was a medical thing involved. We were on a river, and rivers surge are very dynamic. And we had a lot of onlookers, people kind of watching, taking cameras. And luckily, it wasn't in like today's world with a quick Twitter or anything like that. But I think we can debate whether it was unexpected or unanticipated. But I would rather say that there was a sense of unknown or a sense of ambiguity because it wasn't necessarily unanticipated, or unexpected. It was we had anticipated something could go wrong there, so we had the safety in place, but we hadn't thought the next step. We hadn't thought that it was a group of decisions or a group of actions that had led to this moment, and we hadn't thought that next step. So arguably, it could have been anticipated. But it wasn't entirely negative either. From personal experience, it created a lifelong learning, lifelong reflective kind of nature of me. And why was it also good? Well, we didn't apportion blame to anyone. We had a no blame culture. We trained together, we lived together, we did other things together. And over the next 6 years, as I said, this never happened again. So it showed that actually learning from that experience was in itself a leavener for good. So if we take it in isolation, we can see the basics of crisis management or the basics of crisis as well. So we can reflect why it's a crisis. But during a crisis, what is a crisis in that sense? Is well, it's not a singular event, was it? I made decisions during the day, other people made decisions, and we did some actions and we did stuff, and all of that led into the one event. So it wasn't singular. It wasn't just that one person deciding to raft down, although that was a contributory factor, I would say. So then we've got the difference between a smouldering crisis and a sudden crisis. The sudden crisis was that customer getting run over, but it was smouldering from the start of the day when I decided to separate the boats. We had a lack of clarity. There was no leadership. There was a requirement for leadership, though, and requirement for leadership and coordination. We were all too focused, too much information overload. There were different perspectives. We needed a leadership perspective, but also the perspective of the participants, the customers. We're all in different positions. We're all seeing different things. Where was that focal point to bring it all together? Information management, as I said, it was all too much going on. Everyone's just doing stuff. So in order to manage that information and figure out what it means, someone needs to step back, figure it out, and then start communicating. There was no communication. So we started communicating eventually, but the big difference here was things didn't go from really bad to really, really bad because we had training in place. We had the right people. We were actually all professionals in what we were doing. We just lacked a couple of those fundamental things to kind of bring it together. And I think if we're talking about the right people as well, my boss had an opportunity to come down and take control, but he didn't. He guided me and just gave me some very simple instructions of stop and look. And by doing that, he then resolved the situation without having to get involved into the weeds. So being prepared, I think, is ultimately the outcome here, because external influences, the river surging, may be the one trigger which sets you into crisis. So C.S. Lewis once said, the best teachers were always fellow students because they understood better than the teachers themselves how their friends thought and why they found problems difficult. I think that's quite good, isn't it? So on that river then, my boss told me to stop, didn't we? But we were all in it together and we understood together. And by standing back, I could see all different people's sides of it coming together, all the different perspectives. So although our perspectives were different, could argue that we all had the same shared emotions, didn't we? We were a bit stressed. We weren't sure what was going on. We're throwing ropes and all that kind of good stuff. But because we had a culture of reflection that wasn't forced, and it certainly wasn't academic, from that one incident, we could arguably create lifelong learning for everybody. And now here, I'm kind of throwing it your way and saying, hey, go rafting. So if you were to sit down and you Google or a cozier search a couple reflective models, you're going to end up with thousands, not just a couple. So reflection is clearly deeper than we have time to cover today, but I'm going to consider one. It's a double loop learning. So it comes in three parts. Imagine three little circles here and some lines connecting them all. But we've got outcomes, actions, and reasons. The what, and why. But it's more behavioral. We're looking at the behavior aspect here, sorry. We seek to understand the why behind the what. The why behind what was the outcome, what did we do, but why did we do that to create the outcome? So in crisis, we're often symptoms based, aren't we? We're focusing on the symptoms, and that's good because we can develop decision matrices, we can develop action points, decision points, or so forth as we go forwards. But we need to review before the crisis why we're coming up with those decisions in the first place. And then after the crisis, why we came up with those and made those decisions. So we seek to create actions through reasoning and understanding of behavioral change. So if we can take that and say we want to change the base behaviors, well, nature and adventure create new biases in us, new groundings, and it gives us the chance to create these new base behaviors. It takes us out of that boardroom, as I said before. Not everybody's experts out there. You know, we're learning new skills with an instructor, which means we're going to learn the new skills without bad habits. But in the boardroom, I would argue that we've all got bad habits, and we just need to realize that. So we want to reinforce the good. We want to reinforce a pattern of behaviors that reach a good out state, and we want to reinforce our comfort zone, and if you like, grow our comfort zone. So how are we going to do that in our crisis team? Well, our crisis team is normally made up of people from different positions as opposed to the individuals themselves, aren't they? So if we consider their position, likely they've got habits that they fall back on when they're under stress. So it's those bad habits combined with stress that we want to change. Yeah, they might be closed off, they might be overconfident, bossy, angry, or whatever. So adventure is a change to the comfort zone here. We can create these new patterns of behaviors and we start to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. So if we move away from the day to day, we can take what we've learned and affect the day to day, if that makes sense. So we work outside of a real crisis and we create a resilient team before it matters. So when we have stress without training, we reinforce the negative behaviors. But if we have stress with training, we reinforce the good behaviors. I'll use an example of skiing. So for those of you that ski, if you're coming off a slightly steeper cliff that you didn't expect to be there, go, oh my goodness, you're going to lean back, you're going to throw all your weight on the back and you're going to lose control. I would argue that these are the bad habits that we picked up from when we first went on a ski trip and said we didn't need an instructor. But if we take ourselves and we sit with an instructor, we're going to reinforce the good stuff. We're going to learn how to do it properly. It might still take a bit of reflecting once we finally come over that lip again, but we can talk to ourselves. For me, I'll start telling myself off, telling me, Craigo, pump your weight forwards, bent knees, or whatever, yeah? And in essence, we want to kind of double loop ourselves and remind ourselves of the good habits, even though we've got the bad habits there. We go back, why am I doing this? Okay, I'm doing it because of this. Change it, boom, and the outcome's changed. There's also triple loop learning, but I don't think we're going to cover that today. So why reflect then? So reflection is simply thinking. We can learn from our mistakes, certainly true, but we can also learn from the good because we want to reproduce the good behaviors. Yeah, we want to reproduce the good stuff that the instructor told us about skiing. But we can translate our learning. There's crossover in every aspect here, not just into crisis, but into everything we do of our daily lives. So we often forget to reflect on experiences outside of our subject matter. So that's the point. Although adventure is the theme here, let's think about things that weren't just adventure and any experience is relatable. So reflection, if done right, is a really powerful tool to contemporize what we've done and to transfer it into our everyday working, like I said. But now looking specifically at adventure, I think nature, I firmly believe that nature has a real leveling effect on us, right? We don't judge, we're not judged on our positions at the boardroom table. We're only judged on how good we look in a wetsuit, which is arguably negative. So if we then take adventure, we got adventure, we add a little bit of the stress that we want in there, we get our performance and we bring it all together, well, then we can start to really review what's going on. How did I perform under stress? I was in an adventure environment. We were in it together. How did we get on? What did you do, Steve? And then Sharon in the corners just crying or whatever, doesn't matter. But in the classroom after action review, it can often be convergent. We sit down and go, well done, and we all lean and look at the top of the table. But outdoors, I think it can be far more divergent. We can sit around a fire with a professional facilitator. We have less structure. Yeah, I think it's inbuilt. It's inbuilt in us as to what we're going to be doing, or how we're reflecting. We don't have to make it academic by process. But I'd argue if you sit by a fire with a brew of your choice, how many of you have not found yourselves lost in thought staring at the fire and just reflecting without purpose? So what is adventure education? Well, thinking, Craigie boy, I get it. I get reflection now, but what are you talking about adventure? Yeah, I don't really want to go rafting. There's more than that. So I said I'd challenge you to get out of boardroom, and I'm not really challenging you to go whitewater rafting, especially on a dogleg rapid with your 3 kids or whatever. What I am trying to say to you, what adventure education is a type of experiential education. It has elements of risk, cooperation, challenge, and stress. In crisis, we need to understand threats and risks. We need to take risks. We need to take risk in decisions when we don't have the full picture. We need to cooperate in challenging situations. We need to handle the stress, often for long periods of time, and we need resilience. We need resilience, both mental and physical, before we're in that crisis for real. So if we take this another way, if we we can train our crisis capability by testing our team when it doesn't matter, but we need to develop our ability to handle stress. We need to challenge ourselves and go beyond our mental and physical limits so that we know what we're actually capable of. We know that we're capable of making decisions when our heart is actually pumping and when stress is upon us. And they're very different to doing it in a practice crisis scenario. But we need a handrail. And there's a model called a dynamic adventure environment by Pete Bunyan. And he's identified a couple of things that really make adventure education. And I'll list them now if you're ready. So there's overcoming a fear. What that means is getting comfortable with risk, overcoming the psychological stress, crisis, supportive group. We need to collaborate, we need to contribute, and we need teamwork, whatever we're doing, especially in crisis. We need leadership. So regardless of if you've got a flat structure or a hierarchical structure, you do need leadership, but we need to develop our own leadership. We need to learn and explore methods as to what style of leadership works and what part of the crisis. We need physical exercise. Now you're thinking, okay, I work in IT. I'm not so keen on getting up and taking my computer outside and doing exercise while I'm working. No, you're right. But you need to know how to make decisions under stress, and that physiological stress of our heart pumping, the external factors that we can't control. And that is why we get outdoors. And we need a natural environment. Why do we need a natural environment in adventure education? Well, it's grounding. It's that neutral environment. It takes us away from that hierarchical, that all the stresses and internal stresses of the corporate structure. But importantly, through adventure education, we can make training relevant. We can specify and set areas, and we can complement our already in place training program. So crisis capability, though, is not just policy or practice, is it? Of course, we need to follow policy. We need to train and practice in the crisis room, but it's the people. It's people and relationships that make the difference. I firmly believe that crisis capability and adventure do go hand in hand. If we consider that reflection is a major part of adventure through facilitated and open reflection practices in front of the fire and away from the internal factors that affect our performance in the office, I think we can grow our competence. I really do, because if we now just simply reflect on some experiences we've had, not just the big ones, but the little ones, Yeah, we can start to come up with some ways and means to go, okay, yeah, what about that? What about that? What about, you know what I mean? So consider that one time I went walking or canoeing. Can you bring anything across that can really help your crisis team or your own personal development? Consider other activities, museum visits or team building days or whatever, it doesn't matter. I want to express that we can get out of the office. And if we're creative enough, we can create new learning opportunities that cross over into our everyday working lives. And importantly, our crisis competence. So don't just think about your crisis team. We need to build relationships before the crisis event. If we know people just a little bit more, just by talking to them and getting to meet them, we can learn a bit more about their viewpoints, can't we? What's important to them? We can start to build empathy. We can start to build trust. Get the legal team along. They always need a break. But this relationship building itself is the capability enhancer. That capability enhancer is what sitting around a campfire, getting outdoors can really bring. But importantly, take a step back, make a brew, and reflect on anything. Don't ignore the power of a good cup of tea and a campfire. So that is Adventure in Crisis. I've been Craig. I'm staying around for the panel afterwards, but thank you very much for your time.